Welcome back to Rico 12. I'm Justin. I'm your host. I am a son of God and a recovering addict. Such a grateful time of year and happy time of year, hopefully. It's a difficult time of year for many, but I hope you're finding joy in this season of holidays, whatever holiday you may celebrate or don't celebrate. I hope you find joy in this season. Anyways, I'm grateful to continue this Rico 12 series on Journey in Recovery. Over the last several weeks in December, we have had pre-recorded meetings or interviews that I had with recovering addicts back in 2019 and 2020 on each of the 12 steps of recovery. And today we continue that before we resume our regular in-person live meetings that will be every Friday at noon Central Time. Those will resume on January 6th, 2023 with Robert P., who will be sharing his experience, strength, and hope on the difference between alone and loneliness in recovery and in addiction. That'll happen January 6th, 2023. If you are not already on the email list to get invitations, links, and information on those live meetings, please go to www.rico12.com. reco12.com and click on join us and input your email address so you can get on that list and we can get you involved in those live meetings once we resume them in January. Really excited about that. And I'm also really excited about this conversation that I had with Wendi F. This is going to be meeting number 141. And Wendi F is a sexaholic who spoke with us twice in the Rico 12 speaker meetings, one on episode number 4 and one on episode number 127. So one of the first ones we did and one of the last ones we did before this series, the special series of pre-recorded events. So she is kind of a bookend almost in this area, and she's just a fantastic speaker, has an amazing story. She's going to be sharing her experience, strength, and hope on step 9 in this meeting. In this conversation, we explore her life experience that led her to an eventual awakening. We discuss what it means to find the core of an addiction and how it differs from many of the ancillary or appendages to an addiction. We discuss a new life with a higher power and the absolute power of having a sponsor to help you walk through the steps of recovery. All this while sharing her experience, strength, and hope on step 9. This is another powerful conversation that will help break the stigma of addiction if you allow it to. On to some business. If you continue to find value in Rico 12 as a tool in your own recovery walk, please share it with your friends, with your recovery network, with those who walk this path with you or who may need to start on this journey here. I am sincerely hopeful that my higher power is making this into an instrument for others to find peace, to find recovery, to find that happy, joyous, and free that we are promised if we continue in these steps. You can do that by, sharing this podcast with others. You can do that by rating and reviewing the podcast in the podcast platform of your choice. And you can do this by donating. And the links for donation will be in the show notes of the meeting below here in whatever podcast platform you're listening. Now, let's prepare to get on and listen to Wendi F. as she shares her experience, strength, and hope on step 9. Here we go. I am sitting here with Wendi F. through the magic of the internet, and I'm grateful that you're willing to sit down with me, Wendi. Why don't you introduce yourself as you would as if you were in a 12-step meeting?
Sure. Okay. Hi, I'm Wendi. I'm a sexaholic. I live in Colorado. My sobriety date is November 7th of 11, and awesome. I'm very grateful for that.
Awesome. Thank you, Wendi. It's good to have you here. All right. So tell me a little bit about yourself, Wendi. What is as you go back and share your story of addiction in your life, tell me kind of where things started and what happened there.
Okay. Well, it's kind of interesting. I'm pretty sure I was born to be a sexaholic. I was born into, the short version is my dad was a Marine in Vietnam and went AWOL, and we moved up to Canada. And that's when a lot of people started coming in our house, in and out. He was instrumental in helping other soldiers who had went AWOL to come up and find jobs and get fake IDs and that kind of stuff. So a lot of men started coming in and out of the house. And of course, it was not to age myself, but it was in the 60s. So I was really exposed to not only sexual activity, but the emotions and the environment that come along with that, just because, I was in the middle of all of that with my parents. So, I can remember times when, I would come out of my room with my pillow over my head and say, "Shut up." Like I was the adult,
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure that's where my voyeurism started, because I used to sneak out and watch all of it. And, I'm pretty sure that's where a lot of my behaviors are. Basically, I mimicked my mom and my dad. And, I learned how to manipulate and use and objectify people in that environment. And when we moved back to the States, I was basically a loner because I grew up in a house with no electricity, no indoor plumbing. We were on the run. We lived in multiple places, a van, a tent. I mean, we lived all over. And when we came back to the States, I was a loner. I was an outcast. I talked funny, and I didn't know anybody. And so I learned pretty quickly how to get friends, and that was through alcohol, drugs, and sex, because in my house, all that stuff was totally fine. So anyway, that's where kind of a little bit of my background, where it all came from.
Well, good. Thanks for sharing that. So sounds like you had it didn't sound like you were aware that it was different, but it wasn't a normal
No,
upbringing for what most people would experience. Is that correct?
not at all. Not at all.
How old were you when you moved back to the States and started interacting with the public again?
I was about in third grade.
Okay,
Like
so you were
nine.
only like 7 or 8 years old, huh?
Yeah, little. Yeah.
Wow. So as you experience those things at such a young age, and you mentioned that you learned how to get friends through alcohol and drugs and sexes, how did that affect your teenage years, your young adult years?
Hmm. Well, let's just say I don't remember a lot of it.
Mm,
I started doing a lot of drugs when I was in my teenage years. And so there's a lot of that I don't remember, but I can tell you, and that's kind of one of the effects, is that I can't remember. Like I wish I could remember a lot of that stuff, but I can't. And I always dated older guys. So the guys in high school with me were not attractive to me. I liked the older guys because they could get alcohol, they could get drugs. And I could manipulate them with sex because they were older. And
So, but your conclusion is that your core addiction is sex and not alcohol or drugs, right?
yes, the alcohol and drugs just kind of intensified the sexual addiction.
Hmm.
It took away all my inhibitions or reasonable thinking.
Hmm. So, where did you start to realize, hey, I may have a problem with some of these things that are going on?
Kind of funny. I never really thought I had a problem. In my household, all this stuff was normal. Our religion was sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So I never really had a feeling that it was wrong. I always thought that either people were also doing it or wanted to be doing it. I had manipulated my husband into allowing other people into our life. And I always thought, oh, yeah, everybody wants to be like me, And
Yeah.
it wasn't until my husband caught me cheating. It was like the fourth time that I had been caught.
Mm-hmm.
And even then, I still didn't admit it. I found I was watching TV and I saw them talking about sex addiction. And my first thought was, oh, I can tell him that I'm an addict and I'm sick and then he can't leave me. Even going into the program was like one big manipulation. And it wasn't until I came into the program trying to save my marriage. And after not very long, I realized I was there to save my life. So whether my marriage survived or not was, a different question.
So that thought of being a sex addict had never even crossed your mind until you saw it on TV. About how long ago was that?
About 9 years ago. I've been in the program for about 9 years.
Uh-huh.
My first year of sobriety, I wasn't really working the program.
Right.
Still an ego. But anyway, yeah.
But you were just basically doing it then to save your marriage. It wasn't necessarily to.
No, I didn't want to change. I didn't think I was doing anything wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And, I would say, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry all the time, but I never really meant it.
So was rock bottom when you were caught by your husband that fourth time, or was it a little bit later when you had maybe a come to myself, an
Yeah.
awakening moment?
Yeah. Well, I think the bottom started with my husband, because like I said, this wasn't the first time, and I was positive that he was going to leave. I knew that this time I couldn't convince him to stay with just my old, manipulations.
Mm.
And then I think the real rock bottom hit, like you said, when I started working step one, really, is when I realized, wow, this is not normal. So I think that we're starting to work step one was probably the end of my bottom and then the beginning of the new life.
So let me kind of do a little separation here. I mean, sex is the core of the addiction, but alcohol and drugs have always played a major part in that.
Mhm.
Is alcohol and drugs, is that something you have also stepped away from? Tell
Oh
me a
yeah.
little bit about your experience with that and why and when you stepped away from those also.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of weird because it wasn't difficult. Like some people that are alcoholics or drug addicts or whatever have a difficult time. For me, I just walked away.
Hmm.
Like I didn't like being drunk anymore. I didn't want to feel drunk. I want to be able to talk, and I don't want to just go to bed. Usually when I would drink, I'm just tired. Also, I used to go out to bars a lot and drink, and that I would get into a lot of trouble with that, because when I would drink, I would just all my inhibitions would just go out the window. So after being in the program, it didn't take me very long, and I just quit. I just quit drinking and doing. I had quit doing drugs probably like I don't know 15 years prior, but I had
Okay.
still been drinking. Once I just walked away. I just knew that I didn't want to. I knew that that was contributing greatly to my sex addiction.
Yeah, very interesting. So I want to go back to the 15 years prior when you quit drugs. What made you decide to do that then?
I had been doing a lot of cocaine, and I don't know, it's like one day I just went in the bathroom and I looked at my face and I was just all sunken face and gray, and I looked out and there were all these people in the house that I didn't really know. They were only there because of drugs, and I just decided right then that this is not I don't know how to explain it. I packed up all my stuff from my boyfriend's house and drove off in a car yelling and screaming at him.
Huh. Wow. And that was the last time you did drugs at that point, right?
Yeah, yeah,
It
uh-huh.
was just like I'm sick of this. I don't want this anymore. I'm
Right,
walking away. So
that's right.
that right there also is proof that, to me, that drugs and then alcohol weren't the core of your addiction.
No,
Yeah, if you're just able to walk away and say, that's it, that doesn't sound like
no.
drug addict or alcoholism. So very, very interesting. Thank you for sharing these details. I think they'll be very helpful for a lot of people who hear this, that
Good.
an addict is an addict, but just because I'm addicted to one thing doesn't mean that all the other things that may be around I'm addicted to. They're just kind of ancillary or maybe appendages to the core, and got to figure out what the core is, right?
Yep, yep.
Very good. So let's talk a little bit. You mentioned earlier that in your household growing up, your religion was sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Mhm.
And since recovery is a spiritual program as well as a physical program, tell me about your spirituality now, your awakening to that, and what your higher power means to you now and everything like that.
Yeah. So I didn't really have a concept of God. As I told you, I had no idea. Really, what happened for me was I did a lot of acting as if. So my sponsor would say, I want you to pray. And I would be like, well, okay. A lot of times I would feel like I was talking to myself,
Yeah.
because I wasn't aware of that presence up there. So I would just do it and I would just act as if I believed. And it just like it says in the literature, after a while, I really did believe it. I did start to believe that there was a higher power and that he cared about me and that I was now protected. I remember in the beginning telling my little girl inside that, we have God now. We don't need all of this icky other stuff. And really, I don't go to church. I don't have like a specific religion.
Mm-hmm.
My spirituality is within other people and within nature. So I experience God that way now.
Mm.
And I do a lot of praying. I do a lot of the regular prayers, the written prayers. But really, my biggest moments with God are when I'm just talking from my heart. Like, even if I'm not happy, I'll say, God, I'm not happy with you right now. And
Right.
it's okay. I'm human. That's going to happen. Now I live on the front range of the Rockies. And when I walk out my door, the first thing I see is this huge mountain.
Mm.
And that's my reminder. Oh, hey, God, good to see you today.
Mm.
That makes me feel like, whoop, I'm like this big in God's whole plan.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, that's really neat. Thank you for sharing that. What do you remember the first time when you were just acting as if when you're praying, when you felt like, oh, there's really something here that's bigger than me?
yeah, I'll tell you what happened in that case. Again, I was on the phone with my sponsor and I was whining and crying because, financial insecurity. We were broke and we still had like 2 weeks until payday and I had no money for gas, whatever. And I was just whining to her on the phone and she said, "You need to get on your knees and pray." And I said, "Well, how's that going to help? I need money. I don't
Mm.
need prayer. I need money." And she said, "Just do it. Just get on your knees and pray that you will trust that you will be provided for and that he will never let you down." And so I did it. And again, it was just like, I don't know how this is going to help. But honestly, this is a true story. Later on, I went and I was getting ready for bed and I put my bathrobe on, and in the pocket of my bathrobe, I found $30.
Mm.
I don't even know where it came from because well, I don't put money in my bathrobe. But that was
Right.
the moment when I went, "Oh my gosh, this is a divine intervention right here, and I believe it now."
Yeah.
So it was almost like I needed something physical to happen before I could have blind faith.
And your reaction was, whoa,
Whoa.
bucks in my pocket.
Yeah.
Tell me how you shared that experience with your sponsor and with others, like within a day or two after it happening.
Well, I mean, I called my sponsor right away. As soon as I did that, I called her right away and said, "You were right. You were right. God does provide for me. He will always provide for me." And sometimes when I share that story, I think people are like, "Yeah, right." And especially newcomers,
Mm-hmm.
that don't have that experience. But I share it because it's how I came to. In the second step, we talk about coming to, and that was how I came to. And I share it, and I hope that it touches people in a way that it touched me. And if it doesn't, that's okay. But that's my experience, and I share it because it really was impactful to me.
Wow. That's really cool. And we'll get to step 9 here, but I want to sit on that for just a minute and talk about that. You said that you came to and you knew at that point that God does provide and he will always provide. How has your life been provided for since then?
Well, anytime I'm in distress, I try to surrender whatever it is I'm distressful over to God. And I can tell you that in experiences with my kids, being a mom is hard because I want to be in control.
Yeah.
But in my experience with my kids, for instance, my one son was getting in a lot of trouble. And I was trying to force an outcome. I was trying to, you need to do this and you need to do this and you need to do this. And I mean, I was driving myself crazy. I was crying and why won't he listen? And it dawned on me that, oh, I don't have to do this. I am not his higher power. He has his own higher power. And so I started surrendering it, and it wasn't immediate, but within a couple of months, his grades were going up. We were getting along better because I was just letting it be. I wasn't trying to be God anymore in his life. So it was like I could just watch God working. It was a miracle. I literally could watch it happening.
So did you go completely hands off at that point, or were you still, these are more parenting questions than recovery questions here, or were you still kind of trying to help guide, just letting God do the path? How did you do that?
Well, a lot of times it was hard actually, because
I believe it.
as a parent, you want to be able to provide everything for your child, but I wasn't completely hands off. I'm human.
Right.
I always try to take my will back, even today. And so I would definitely, it was like I would realize all of a sudden I would go, oh, shoot, here's what I'm doing. And I'm not supposed to be doing that. I'm supposed to be praying and relying on God to help me with this. And so it was almost like slowly it became a habit.
And were you communicating this to your son during this time, saying, hey, I'm just turning you over to God right now? Or how was your communication with him at that point in this process?
We don't really talk a lot about God. And I don't think I actually really shared a lot of that with him. Now that I think about it, I would just, there were times when I would just go up and hug him and say, I'm so glad that, you're doing so well right now. You should be really proud of yourself. And so I didn't really ever say, God's got you. We didn't really talk about because we're not a religious family either. We don't have a lot of religion here either. I just basically, I just loved him through it. I don't know how else to explain it.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Let's go back to recovery stuff.
Okay.
And I'm going to go back to your first meeting or first series of meetings you went to. Tell me what your thoughts were and feelings were the first time you walked through a door into a room.
Well, wow, I'm the only woman. That was my first thought. And I'll be honest with you, when I first walked in and sat down, I was scanning the room. Like, I was like, okay, who in here can I manipulate? Who's the best looking guy? And it was really sick. But what happened was I kept going. And eventually I was so relating to these men that they became like my brothers. And I got feedback from a lot of them as far as, wow, I'm so glad you stayed, because a lot of them in the beginning were like, oh my gosh, there's a woman in the room.
Yeah.
What am I supposed to do? And so I got a lot of feedback that, they really learned a lot from me. I think it's important to be in a mixed meeting. I mean, I need to learn how to relate to the opposite sex in a non-sexual way. And I can't do that in a room full of women. Not that I don't have my women.
Right. So, this was 9-ish years ago. Are you seeing more women in the fellowship now than you did then?
Not in physical meetings. Not in physical meetings, but I have a huge fellowship of women around the world because I do phone meetings. I use WhatsApp to keep in touch. I have women that I talk to that are in Israel, Iran. And so my fellowship of women is huge. It's just not like we don't get to go out for coffee like the guys do. After the meeting, the guys all go do whatever they do, and I don't go. And so, that's really the main thing that I think I miss out on, is being able to take off and go sit with somebody. But I can still do that, just like how we're doing this now.
Right. No, that's really cool. So is your fellowship SA, SAA? What is your fellowship?
I feel strongly that I'm an SA. And the reason is SAA and some of the other S programs let you define your own sobriety. Okay, I'm an addict. I can justify, rationalize, whatever. And so because I did start in one of those other programs and I wasn't getting anywhere, because I could just say, well, I'm just texting. I'm not like meeting up with anybody, and that's not crossing my bottom line. Well, I am the kind of person that needs a solid sobriety definition, and that's what I get in SA.
So what is for the benefit of others who are listening to this who aren't aware of that, what is that solid sobriety definition of SA?
So the definition basically is no sex outside of marriage and no sex with self. That's it. And the other thing that I will mention is that one of the first things that I have to do is admit that I'm powerless over lust, because lust is the driving force behind all of my sexual misbehavior. I want to lust. I want people to desire me. And, there's a whole definition of what lust is, but I think that's my main issue.
Okay. Well, thanks for sharing that. So we've talked a little bit about your first steps into recovery, your rock bottom, some of the motivating factors that drove you. We talked about when you first went, you were just there to save the marriage, and it eventually changed. When did kind of the light bulb really turn on to say, hey, I'm in this and this is the right thing for me to be doing?
Again, I would have to say probably after completing step one. And then I think it was when I guess I would have to say it was step two, because that's when I really started to feel like I had a higher power. And for me, this whole program is based on how I live in my higher power's will.
Well, good. So let's go to the step that we talked about discussing here, which is step 9. But what I want to do is I want to read from the Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, steps 8 and 9, because they are hand in hand. I mean, you can't do step 9 without really having done, well, all the other steps, but step 8 are hand in hand. So step 8 reads, made a list of all persons we had harmed and become willing to make amends to them all. Before I read step 9, were there people on your step 8 list that it was really hard to become willing to make amends to?
Oh, yes. Mainly my abuser, because I was sexually molested. So my abuser he was on the list because my sponsor told me any negative feelings about people, just put them on the list. It doesn't mean at that point that I have to make amends. It just means that I'm getting it out of my head. And so, yeah, there were definitely people on there. And of course, there's people on there that I can't make amends to, whether they're dead or, for whatever reason. So in those cases, I do a lot of living amends. I think that I really realized how many people I hurt. There's a part in the literature that talks about the addict being a tornado raging through everybody and causing so much destruction. And I think that was something that, brought me to my knees too.
Do you mind if we talk a little bit about that, the abuser that was the one that you mentioned as being really hard to become willing to make amends with? Part of this process is seeing what my part in that is, the tornado thing. And with that abuser, what did you determine or were you able to determine what your part in that was? Or how do you go about that? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that was really hard. And I think that what I came to the conclusion was that my part was that I carried that resentment into every relationship in my life. And I didn't have any part in him abusing me. I was 5 years old, right? So the only thing I did was pack away that resentment and carry it around, and it would just bleed over into every other relationship that I had. As far as for actually forgiving him, it came down to the point, and I think this is in step 8, but we realized that these people are sick too. And when I look back at how he grew up, I mean, it's really no surprise what he turned into. And so I have to look at that as him as a sick person who needs help. And after having, by the time I got to step 8, I was solidified in, making a new way of life for me and my family. And I was solidified in, I'm working this program. I'm going to do whatever it takes. And if that means I have to forgive him, then I have to forgive him, because I can't live a free life when I'm carrying around that stuff.
Yeah. And that's such a powerful and difficult thing to do.
Yes. That didn't happen overnight.
No. Man, thank you for sharing that. I mean, so many people, and myself included, and, possibly you included, live in such a victim mentality when something like that happens in our lives.
Yes.
Woe is me. That
Mhm.
person did this to me. That person betrayed me. That person did that. And I will never let it go. And I'm going to hold those resentments and make it affect everything else.
Well, it's a righteous, it's a righteous resentment, because it's true. I should feel bad about him doing that, but because I'm not able to handle self-righteous anger in any form of a healthy way, I have to let it go.
That's such an interesting thing you said there, because I'm not able to handle righteous anger in a way that's helpful. I have to let it go. Have you run into many people that can handle righteous anger or righteous resentments in a healthy way?
That's a good question. I think that there are people out there. I've worked with people
Mm-hmm.
that are able to, dissect a situation that's painful or destructive or not productive. And so I have seen people who I call it, quote, normal behaviors, but it's not very often. I mean, I think that even though if they're not sex addict, I think that relating to people is still a difficult thing.
All right. Is there anything else on that little bit before we jump into step 9 that you think it would be helpful to share for me or anybody else listening?
Yeah. Another way that I made amends for my abuser is by indirect amends. So he was very abused as a child himself. So I will donate items to programs that help people who need that, because I think, I'm going to start getting choked up. If he would have had the help that he needed, it probably he wouldn't have affected me in that way. So part of my amends is trying to help people get what they need. And that's also part of this program. So it works out well.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So step 9 reads, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. So tell me what that means to you and some of the processes. I mean, you mentioned indirect amends, you mentioned living amends. We'll talk about direct amends. We'll talk about whatever you want to here, but tell me a little bit about why step 9 was a powerful process for you.
For one thing, I was able to say I was wrong. I did a lot of saying I'm sorry, which really didn't mean a whole lot. If I say I'm wrong, it's a lot more powerful to me and somebody else. And the other part of it is I don't know how else to explain. It's kind of like a self-imposed jail. Like you feel like you're in this jail. And as soon as I start to admit my wrongs, forgive people, try to make up for any harm I've done, I feel like the doors just open and I'm out and I'm free. I don't have that guilt, that shame, that fear that someone's going to go, "Why did you do that?" I mean, I don't have that. When I make amends, it's like the guilt just evaporates. And whether that person is receptive to the amends or not doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. I'm doing it so that I can start a new way of life, which is being honest and having integrity and, caring about people instead of just looking at them as objects or, things to be manipulated.
Yeah. I love how you stated, I've said I'm sorry a million times before and it carries no weight.
Right.
But when I say I'm wrong, it carries a lot more weight and authority with it. Why do you think that is?
Because number one, I'm admitting, and I'm not blaming, I'm not justifying, I'm not being self-righteous or in self-pity. I'm not a victim.
Hmm.
I mean, that's probably what I would say, is that it's, it's a freeing feeling. I don't know how else to explain it. I will say, with another thing with regarding to amends, is it doesn't have to be this big grand gesture. It doesn't have to be a five page letter, saying every single thing I did. So yeah, we can talk about that, because one of the greatest amends that I made was to my husband, and it was on a piece of paper that was like a paragraph long.
No, that's awesome. Let's talk about the different types of amends there are. I mean, you did mention you mentioned indirect amends and living amends. Tell me first, what are living amends? What and when would be appropriate individuals or times to use living amends as your way of making amends?
Well, when I'm making living amends, it's not something that I go, okay, I'm done, I've made that amends. Because what I consider a living amends is a constant changing of my attitude, a constant changing of how I relate to people. So it's not like, okay, I'm sorry, and now that's over. A living amends means that I have changed my behavior, I have changed my attitude. Like I said, I can actually listen to people and not just sit there and wait for myself to justify whatever they're saying. you know I could actually listen to people, and I do things like, I now know the things that are important to my husband. So he is all I really need to do is show him a tiny bit of affection, and that's a living amends. Things like I would never want to sit next to him or hug him or anything, because God forbid anybody think I'm not available. And now it's another one of those where if you act as if, eventually it just becomes normal, like sitting next to him and just putting my hand on his knee. That's something that is important to him. That's a living amends. And I have to continue to do that. So it's just, to me, living amends is just changing my behavior and my attitude from one of ego to God.
That was powerful, and something you mentioned in there really struck a chord with me, and I can't. It'll come back to my mind at some point in the middle of another. The listening. You said you can now listen to people, and when you said that, that really struck a chord. I mean, much of my life, I think I've always had a gift to be able to listen to people, but I used it so, and I think I still sometimes use it so sparingly or targeted only in certain places where maybe I can feel I can manipulate something out of somebody. Man, that was kind of a two before upside the head that I'm going to have to do some pondering on. Thank you for swinging that two before at me.
Anytime.
All right, so we talked a little bit about living amends. Is there anything else though that you feel is important to share about living amends before moving on to a different kind of amends?
No, I mean, I think that's pretty much it. The living amends to me just means that I'm more of a channel for God's love. So if I'm doing that, God's not going to be harmful to people.
All right. So let's talk about the next one you mentioned earlier, indirect amends. Tell me a little bit about what indirect amends are and how that works.
So part of the step, as you read, is accept where to cause harm, right? So to
Right.
others. And so that's where I feel like indirect amends are appropriate. For instance, I I spent a lot of time one night stand. I mean, there's a lot of people that are faceless.
Mm.
And so in order for I can't go and find all of those people, to make direct amends. So the indirect amends I make is, again, by performing some sort of service that relates to that. For instance, it talks about a guy who prays for every prostitute he sees. There's something in the literature about that. So I do a lot of that. I pray for those people to have what I want, what God's given me. And that is an indirect amends. It's a fine line, because you have to know if the amends, it may not hurt the person that's sitting in front of you, but maybe down the line, the domino effect, it's going to hurt their wife or their child, and so the indirect amends are very important at that point too. The main thing I will say also is, without the guidance of a sponsor, there's absolutely no way I could have done this. Absolutely no way. I would have been able to just justify away. And, like I said in the beginning, I never thought I did anything wrong. So without a sponsor, I'm just another dry drunk, basically.
Yeah. And the indirect amends and the living amends seem to really kind of go almost hand in hand. They coordinate pretty well with that. Tell me another type of amends and then discuss that. I know we've got direct and we've got, at least my understanding, like letters not to be sent would be another one that.
Yeah. I never did the letters thing. Okay. As far as other indirect amends, yeah, it's just, for me, it's just doing the good that I can do now. I mean, it's being able to be the person that God wants me to be today. And that to me is also a living amends. I'm not in ego anymore. I'm not manipulating. I'm not objectifying. Not to say I try to do it, because I'm human again. Right. But my living amends is that I'm not doing that. My indirect amends, I should say, is that I'm not having those behaviors anymore. And like you said, that kind of goes hand in hand with the living amends. But in that regard, I can be specific as far as, like I said, if I'm donating to a company that would help those kind of people, or, even just praying for them, that's an indirect amends. But yeah, it's hard because it's a fine line between that and living amends.
All right. No, I appreciate that. Now let's talk about direct amends. What are those? And then tell me about maybe your feelings going into maybe the first time you made a direct amends with somebody, and then maybe a scarier one that you did and the results of those.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the ones that I did that I would have to say, well, my first amends was to my husband. And I guess I would probably say that was the scariest as well.
Interesting.
Just because I wanted it to be perfect, right? I wanted him to know exactly how I felt about what I did. I wanted him to know that it really made an impact on me, how he was affected. My amends to him was really, it ended up being very simple. I think what happens, and what happened with me, is we look at this step as a whole and oh my gosh, how am I going to do all of this? So it was important for me to just take it one thing at a time, one person at a time on my list, and refer back to that 8-step list. And, am I doing the direct amends to the people I can do? And one of the other ones that was really scary was, I had a really good friend that I basically used. We would always go out for ladies' night, and anyway, basically I just used her a lot. And so, making amends to her, we hadn't talked in probably 15 years. And we had a big falling out. So I was scared. To talk to her. And quite honestly, I didn't do it face to face because she's in Oregon and I'm in Colorado. But at the moment, I didn't do it face to face. But the first time I went back to Oregon, the first chance I had, I went to her. And I said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything that I did. It was wrong of me to expect you to act this way for my behalf, on my behalf. And ironically, all of that fear vanished. And what she said was, water under the bridge.
Huh.
I expected her to have this, yeah, well, you shouldn't have done this and you shouldn't have done that reaction. And that, I think, is part of direct amends that is surprising to a lot of people, is sometimes either they don't remember, like my brother, when I made amends to my brother, he's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Or they discover that they had a part in it as well. And just the feeling of forgiveness is so powerful. So I think for everybody, the direct amends really provides that powerful freedom.
Did you have any experiences making direct amends where it really didn't go very smoothly, where the response was not positive, or were almost all of them it turned out pretty okay?
Yeah, I didn't really have anybody yell at me. All of my amends really went well. And I honestly, again, I think that was because I had a great sponsor.
Hmm.
When I was writing out my amends, she would look it over and say, yeah, that's dumping. That's guilt. That's blaming,
Hmm.
and I would have to rewrite it. Usually it was the amends to my abuser that she would have to really edit and say, no, that's not right.
It sounds like your sponsor helped you make sure that what you wrote and shared with those people was, I was wrong, rather than I'm sorry, or I was wrong, but here's your part in it,
Bold but part, yeah.
because that concept and that word of but just
Yeah.
shatters the whole process, right?
Just basically negates everything you said before that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm saying this, but I don't really mean it because this is what I really believe.
Right, because you were a jerk too, by the way. But yeah,
Right. Yeah, and in amends, that's not the point.
right,
It's not because, that's what I'm trying to get away from.
right. See if this makes sense to you, and I'm seeing this in my mind this way. I'm doing the best I can to clean my side of the street and take care of my side of the street. And then I see the junk that I've thrown on other people's lawns and whatever else figuratively. And then, I'm still cleaning my side of the street, but I have to go over to their side of the street and say, I was wrong to put this piece of garbage on your front yard. Is there anything I can do to help make that right?
Yeah.
Or, I was just wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
Without saying, but the rest of your front yard's a disaster too, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. My little piece of garbage doesn't matter. Right.
Yeah. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. That is a huge part of making amends is it doesn't matter what the other person has done. It's not, my amends are not directly for that other person. They're for me to be able to open up a new way of life, an honest life with integrity, caring, those kind of things that I didn't have any of.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to think humility meant I was funny. I'm not even kidding.
Wow.
I had no concept of humility.
Oh, that's funny. You're funny. No. So how did that, let's go there for a minute. What kind of woke you up to understanding what humility was?
Admitting I'm wrong.
Hmm.
If I'm admitting I'm wrong, I'm out of ego. And to me, humility means I'm out of ego. That means that I'm there as a channel for God, like I've said before, and that's what humility really means. I'm able to say I'm wrong and I'm not going to die from it. The other thing I really like about humility is going back to how I listen to people, I don't have to jump in and say, yeah, but I did this and this. And so that was way better. I can actually tell people, wow, that's really great. I'm so glad that happened to you, or whatever the situation may be. I can be happy for them and not feel jealous or insecure. And that to me is a lot of part of humility too.
I love that. So how has working your step 9 in making amends, how has that, I mean, you talked about, at least this is the way I interpreted it, like a burden being taken off as you did that. Tell me how that process went and how that feels to have that burden off your shoulders.
Well, I guess one of the best ways I can explain it is for my entire life, I had a knot in my stomach. I'm not even kidding. Like it was just there. It was always, it just considered it part of my life. I always had a knot in my stomach. And when I started making amends, that knot in my stomach dissolved. And I truly believe it was me trying really hard to hold on to my justifications and my resentment and me, you know, and trying to protect myself and all of that. And when I started trusting God and being able to let go of the guilt was really what was killing me. That was the big burden. That was the bag on my shoulder was, the guilt and the shame for the things I had done. And I had no idea that that was what it was. I didn't know that's what the knot in my stomach was until I started working the program.
I think that's really helpful. So I've run into this before in rooms where people come in and one of the first things that's covered is like a step 8, step 9, and they feel like, oh, I need to go out and start making amends right now. What is your advice to someone like that that may think, oh, I know I've done wrong here. I'm going to go make this right now. What do you think about that?
I'm going to go back to the value of having a good sponsor, because my sponsor was able to, you can't really, in my opinion, I always discourage people from doing that. And the reason is, at that point in my recovery, I didn't really know. I mean, I was, again, just trying to justify. And it wasn't really a true amends, because I was just kind of justifying what I was doing.
Yeah, because somebody new is just going about most likely saying hey, I was wrong there, but
Right.
Justifying,
Right. And that was where the help of a sponsor was invaluable. A part of it, again, is not wanting to cause more harm. And that's I don't want to say it's very easy for me to do, but it came naturally for me to be that way. And so now it's not natural anymore.
All right. So, Wendi, what other words of wisdom about step 9 or any other phase of recovery would you like to share with me and the listening audience when they hear this?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I learned was I didn't have to understand everything. And that includes the process of working recovery. There were a lot of times when I didn't understand how this was going to help me. Well, how is that going to help? Get on your knees and pray. Well, how is that going to help? So I really think that that was one of the big things for me. The other thing that I would say is, don't ever try to work the steps alone. Don't ever do it, because this disease caused me to be isolated. I consider myself an extroverted introvert. And what I mean by that is I always surrounded myself with a lot of people. I was the life of the party, but inside I was very insecure. So basically, if I'm not working with a group or a sponsor, it's very easy for me to fall back into ego and think that I have all the answers, and out of humility. So I think that for me anyway, the most important thing was to have a sponsor and other people to hold me accountable. Because as I mentioned, my first year of recovery, I was trying to do it alone. Like, well, I know how to read. I can read the steps. And it didn't take long for me to, it was about a year, I guess, before I lost my sobriety. And it wasn't very hard for me to figure out why. So, because I had no idea what I was doing. And instead of just having the faith that it worked for people that went before me, I forced myself to try and understand it all. And there's just no way to do that. When you get to step 12, it all kind of accumulates together, and it's like, oh, that's why. That's how this integrates into this. And so not being able to understand it in the beginning was huge for me, and to be able to accept that. But definitely one of my main advice for people is don't do it alone.
I love that. I've got 2 more fairly quick questions. First one is, how do you currently work your step 12?
So step 12, again, I consider that for me to just be a channel of God on this earth. And a couple of things that I do, well, I have a sponsee, so I work with her, and that really is really helpful as far as, working a step 12 and really feeling that, practicing the principles in all my affairs. That is another thing that I try to do. I didn't really understand what that meant. And so I went back and studied the principles. And in fact, I even did a talk on it about what the principles really are. And being able to live within that, that's kind of a guide for me to say, this is how life is going to be from here on. And step 12 work, again, it just really is, it's so freeing. I mean, you think, oh, I'm helping this person, but in reality, it's helping me too. And not in a selfish way. It just happens naturally. I have no explanation for it. I have no explanation how God came to me and said, you believe now. I have no explanation for that stuff. It just is faith and trust and working with other people to keep me accountable for who I am.
I love that. The last question is, there are going to be people that listen to this that are either in denial or maybe have never even considered I'm an addict. I mean, kind of like you when you heard the thing on TV, a sex addiction. There's something there, a new concept I've never thought about. And there may be women who are in similar boats and think, no, that's just a man thing or whatever, that's not a woman thing. How would you invite someone in one of those situations to first start attending a meeting or start reaching out for help?
Well, I always suggest going to meetings, and I always suggest going, at least 5 times, because you really get an idea of how you're going to feel, I think, at that point in the meetings. But I always suggest, if there's even an inkling that there's something wrong, investigate it. It may be nothing. It may be the beginning of a new life for you, like it was for me. It's just, if you have that inkling, don't ignore it, investigate it, because you could be missing out. I missed out on so much being so in self and so manipulative. I missed out on a lot. And so I really feel like, if you have an inkling at all, or if you have a question, and there's so many ways to find out, there's so many resources. I mean, you can go to AA literature. You don't have to be in SA literature. The other thing that I do is, in the front of our SA white book, there are 20 questions. And I will refer people to those 20 questions. Do you answer yes to at least 3 of these? It might belong in SA. And I don't ever tell someone, you belong in SA. You need to do that, because I am not their higher power.
Right. No, that's great. And I just pulled up that page there with the 20 questions. So I'm going to post those 20 questions in the show notes of this so that people can look at that and do that on their own. Because
powerful tool, I think, to determine if you're having issues with sex in your life or lust.
Yep. Having issues with lust. Awesome. Well, very good, Wendi. I really, really appreciate you sitting down with me. I mean, this has been a good conversation. I really appreciate it.
Good. Yeah. I appreciate you inviting me to do the service. Again, 12-step work.
Yes.
Carrying the message.
So there you have it. Let's do our 12-step work and carry the message, just like Wendi is being a great example of, and I hope we're trying together in our own lives to carry the message and practice these principles in all our affairs, whether it be in recovery circles or whether it be when we're at the grocery store or at church or wherever we may be. Let's practice these principles in all our affairs and carry this message to others. All right. Once again, a quick reminder that we will be going back to our live speaker meetings starting January 6th, 2023. To get in on those meetings, make sure you're on the email list. I'll send you no more than 2 emails per week, and they will all be focused directly about RICO 12 and the speakers and the lessons learned in those things. Join us in our WhatsApp group, our Facebook group. Join us in those communities and help contribute to those communities and participate in the communications and the discussions that happen there. Okay, I think we're good to start shutting this down. Remember that there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. Keep coming back. Let's trudge this road of happy destiny together.
Standing still a moment, carving out this time, reflecting on the landscape of this life of mine. Peaks too high to conquer, streams too wide to cross, troughs too deep to walk through without incurring loss. Yet here I am, still standing tall, despite the rough terrain. One like me survived the storms and walked through wind and rain. Still standing, I will fight the good fight, still searching for glimmers of light, feet still on the ground. I can still be found, standing still.
My wings are torn and tattered, but I know I still can fly. I may not soar unfettered, I may not rise too high.
Recorded in the book of life and bind it with the sea.